My dad called it an investment in the family's future. I called it the best motivation I ever got. 10 years ago, my parents took every single dollar of my college fund, a fund my late grandmother had spent 15 years building for me, and handed it over to my brother to prop up his mediocre tech startup. I was 18 years old, standing in our living room with my university acceptance letter in my hand, watching my mother smile like she had just solved world hunger. When I cried and asked how I was supposed to pay for tuition, my father looked me in the eye without a trace of remorse and said, "Serena, don't be selfish. Your brother Julian is going to build $1 billion company. Once he makes it, he'll buy you 10 college degrees. Family supports family." Julian didn't buy me 10 college degrees. He didn't even buy me a cup of coffee. What he did was burn through $75,000 of my educational future in less than 6 months on artisanal espresso machines, custom leather office chairs, and ergonomic standing desks for a mobile app idea that crashed before it even launched on the App Store. They thought they had stripped me of my future, my dignity, and my chance at a better life. They thought I would just submit, stay local, take out predatory loans, or work a minimum wage job while cheering for my brother from the sidelines. But as I stood in that living room, watching Julian smugly order a customized laptop with my tuition money, a quiet, icy clarity washed over me. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a fit. I simply walked upstairs to my bedroom, packed my entire life into 3 duffel bags, and left. Follow my story until the end to see how the tables turned, and make sure to comment the city or country you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Serena, and at 33 years old, I have learned that revenge isn't a dish best served cold. It's a dish best served in commercial real estate. To understand the sheer magnitude of what my family did to me, you have to understand the dynamic of the house I grew up in. My father was a middle management accountant who treated life like a balance sheet, where Julian was the only asset, and I was a permanent liability. Julian was 2 years older than me, handsomer than he was smart, and blessed with the kind of smooth-talking charm that convinced everyone around him that he was destined for greatness. If Julian brought home a C on a report card, my parents framed it on the refrigerator and blamed the teacher's rigid grading style. If I brought home a 98 on an advanced calculus exam, my mother would look at the paper, sigh, and ask why I hadn't pushed for those last 2 points, before reminding me to fold Julian's laundry. My grandmother was the only person in that entire bloodline who saw through the charade. Before she passed away when I was 12, she set up an irrevocable educational trust for me, putting $75,000 aside specifically for my higher education. But because of a poorly drafted legal clause written by an old family attorney, my parents were listed as co-trustees until I turned 21. They were supposed to hold those funds in fiduciary trust. Instead, the moment Julian presented them with a 30-page presentation about his revolutionary tech startup, an app designed to let people order boutique ice cream on demand, my father signed the papers, drained the account, and transferred every penny into Julian's corporate entity. When I confronted them that night, my mother had the audacity to hand me a brochure for a local community college and a night shift application for a nearby warehouse. "You're a resilient girl, Serena," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Julian needs this momentum right now. Men in tech have a narrow window. You can always go to school later." That night was the last time I slept under their roof. I moved onto the couch of a high school friend's older sister. Over the next 4 years, I lived on a diet of instant ramen, public transportation, and 3 hours of sleep a night. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously: morning shifts as a barista, afternoon shifts in the university admissions office, and late-night shifts cleaning corporate office buildings in downtown Chicago. I applied for every single grant, private scholarship, and academic bursary in existence. I fought for every decimal point on my GPA with a ferocious, feral desperation. When I graduated top of my class with a bachelor's degree in finance, my parents didn't attend the ceremony. They were across the state, attending the launch party for Julian's second startup venture, an enterprise that had already consumed another $50,000 of my parents' personal retirement savings. I didn't send them an invitation anyway. While Julian was busy pitching venture capitalists in overpriced suits paid for by my parents' credit cards, I landed an entry-level analyst position at a mid-sized commercial real estate firm. I was the first person in the office at 6 in the morning and the last person to leave at 10 at night. I studied the mechanics of debt financing, property acquisition, tax abatements, and corporate leasing agreements the way a soldier studies battle maps. My mentors quickly realized that I had an uncanny, almost unnatural ability to spot undervalued commercial properties and negotiate airtight lease structures. By 27, I had earned a full-ride merit scholarship to a top-tier MBA program. By 30, I was a junior partner at a premier private equity group specializing in commercial property portfolios, while Julian spent a decade bouncing from one failed startup to another, continually liquidating my parents' assets and leaving a trail of unpaid vendors in his wake. I was quietly building a net worth that eclipsed everything my father had ever earned in his 40-year career. During those 10 long years, the silence from my end was absolute. I went completely no contact. I changed my phone number, wiped my personal social media profiles, and cut ties with any mutual family acquaintances who tried to act as messengers. My parents tried to reach out twice during my second year of business school, not to apologize, but because Julian was facing a corporate debt deadline, and my father thought my rising career meant I could act as a guarantor for a $50,000 business line of credit. I didn't even reply. I simply had my attorney send a formal cease and desist letter outlining the potential legal consequences of trust, fund fraud, if they ever attempted to communicate with me again. That letter bought me 4 years of pure, uninterrupted peace. But greed and incompetence always have a way of bringing bad people back into your orbit. 6 months ago, my private equity firm was approached to acquire a 3-story, historic brick commercial building in the heart of Chicago's booming tech corridor. The property was a gold mine, high foot traffic, solid structural bones, and prime for long-term lease repositioning. As the lead partner on the acquisition, I was handed the complete due diligence package, including the master lease roll, which listed every commercial tenant currently occupying space in the building. I sat in my corner office on the 42nd floor, holding my morning coffee, and flipped to page 12 of the tenant register. My eyes landed on Suite 204. Tenant name, Voss Dynamics LLC. Managing partner, Julian Voss. I stared at the paper for a long, silent moment. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I immediately requested the full lease file for Suite 204 from the seller's brokers. The story told in those documents was almost poetic in its irony. Julian had moved his latest venture, an AI-driven marketing agency that was effectively just him and 3 underpaid interns, into the building 3 years prior. To project an image of success to his dwindling list of clients, he had leased an expansive, 1,100-square-foot corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows. However, the previous building owner had been a soft-spoken, elderly landlord who had allowed Julian to slide by on an exceptionally below-market lease rate of $1,500 a month. Even better, Julian's 5-year lease was set to expire in precisely 90 days, with 0 renewal options pre-negotiated. He was running his entire operation on a month-to-month goodwill buffer, completely oblivious to the fact that the building was being sold. I closed the folder, called our legal team, and instructed them to finalize the building purchase in cash through a subsidiary holding company named Nana Trust Assets LLC. 3 weeks later, the deal closed. I was now the sole managing entity and legal landlord of the building housing my brother's business. I didn't immediately barge into his office or send a dramatic email. I played the long game. I spent the next 60 days auditing the building's operations, upgrading the security infrastructure, and preparing formal lease renewals for all the legitimate, paying tenants in the building. Every single small business owner in that building received a fair, market-rate lease extension with favorable terms, except Suite 204. 30 days before Julian's lease expired, I drafted a formal asterisk notice of lease terms adjustment and corporate entity review asterisk. According to the prevailing commercial market data for that specific district in Chicago, Prime office space was currently renting for roughly $35 to $40 per square foot. Given the location and square footage of Suite 204, a fair market rate was around $4,500 a month, triple what Julian was paying. But I didn't stop there. Because Julian had been operating on a month-to-month holdover status without a formal extension, municipal commercial tenant laws allowed the landlord to impose a mandatory security deposit equivalent to 3 months of the new rent rate, plus proof of liquid corporate assets to guarantee lease performance. I personally signed the document as managing director of *Nana Trust Assets LLC and had it served directly to Suite 204 via formal process server on a rainy Tuesday morning. The reaction was instantaneous. Less than 2 hours after the server delivered the envelope, my office phone rang. It was an unrecognized local number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a frantic, breathless message played through my desk speakers. It was my father's voice. He sounded 10 years older, his tone thick with a mixture of rage, desperation, and panic. Serena, if you are listening to this, you need to call me back immediately. Julian just received a legal notice from your company. This has to be a mistake. He cannot pay $4,500 a month. That is a 300% increase. His business is at a critical juncture right now. You are going to ruin him. Call me back right now. I didn't call him back. Instead, I waited until 4:30 that afternoon, put on a sharp, charcoal gray tailored suit, grabbed my leather portfolio, and walked the 4 blocks from my firm to the building. When I stepped into Suite 204, the scene was almost nostalgic. The office was decorated with expensive glass desks, plush velvet couches, and a state-of-the-art espresso machine, the exact same aesthetic priority Julian had displayed 10 years ago with my college money. Julian was packing behind his desk, sweat shining on his forehead, while my father sat in a leather armchair, frantically shuffling through the lease documents. My mother was standing near the window, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. They had clearly gathered the entire family to strategize how to fight the greedy corporate landlord. The door clicked shut behind me. All 3 of them turned around. For a full 10 seconds, the room was completely silent. The color drained from my mother's face so fast I thought she was going to faint. My father stood up so quickly he knocked his reading glasses off his lap onto the hardwood floor. Julian just stared at me, his mouth open like a fish out of water. Serena, my mother whispered, her voice cracking. What are you doing here? I walked calmly into the center of the room, unbuttoned my blazer, and set my portfolio on the glass conference table. Good afternoon, I said, my voice smooth, level, and entirely devoid of emotion. I am here in my capacity as the managing director of Nana Trust Assets LLC. I understand there was some confusion regarding the lease adjustment notice served to this suite this morning. My father took a step forward, his face twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. Serena, is this some kind of sick joke? You bought this building. You are the one trying to gouge your own brother for $4,500 a month. I am not gouging anyone, David, I replied, using his first name with deliberate, razor-sharp precision. $4,500 is the exact market valuation for an 1,100-square-foot corner office in this zoning district. In fact, given the premium natural light in this suite, $4,500 is actually a slight discount. Discount? Julian finally exploded, stepping out from behind his desk, his fists clenched. Are you insane, Serena? I don't have $4,500 a month. My agency is in a scaling phase. We are operating on razor-thin margins right now. You know damn well I can't afford this. I turned my head slowly and looked Julian dead in the eye. Then you can't afford this office, Julian. It's really that simple. We are your family, my mother wailed, rushing over to grab my arm. I stepped back smoothly, letting her hand fall into thin air. Serena. How can you be so cold? You disappeared for 10 years. You broke our hearts. And now you come back just to kick your brother when he's trying to build something. He's been trying to build something for a decade, Mom, I said, looking at her with a calm, piercing gaze. And he's been doing it by leeching off Dad's retirement, bankrupting vendors, and using money that didn't belong to him. My father slammed his hand on the desk. That was an investment in our family's future. We told you that 10 years ago. Julian was destined for big things, and you were just being an ungrateful, selfish child who couldn't see the bigger picture. I let out a quiet, single-note laugh. It echoed through the modern office, cold and metallic. An investment in the family's future, I asked, opening my portfolio and pulling out a pristine, notarized copy of my university transcript, my MBA degree, and my firm's latest corporate earnings statement. 10 years ago, you took $75,000 that my grandmother explicitly left for my education. You handed it to a man-child who used it to buy leather chairs and boutique coffee. You told me to work night shifts in a warehouse and go to community college. I took a step closer to my father, who noticeably flinched. I worked 3 jobs. I slept 3 hours a night. I built a multi-million-dollar real estate career out of absolute nothing while your investment burned through every single dollar you had left in your savings accounts. So let's look at the balance sheet, David. Who was the real investment? The room went dead silent. My mother looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. My father's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Now let's talk about the business at hand, I continued, pulling out a fresh legal document from my folder and sliding it across the table toward Julian. The terms of the lease adjustment are non-negotiable. You have 2 options, Julian. Julian stared at the document, his hands trembling. What options? Option 1, I said, holding up a finger. You sign the new lease today. You pay $4,500 a month, plus a 3-month security deposit of $13,500 due by 5 o'clock this Friday. If you miss the deadline by 1 minute, I execute a formal commercial eviction. Julian went pale. I don't have $13,000. I don't even have $5,000. Then you'll like option 2, I said softly, holding up a second finger. Option 2 is a formal mutual lease termination agreement. You pack up your expensive espresso machine, your velvet couches, and your standing desks, and you vacate my building by midnight on the last day of this month. If you leave the space in broom-clean condition, I won't sue you for the month-to-month holdover rent penalties you accrued under the previous landlord. You're kicking me out, Julian whispered, his voice cracking with pure, pathetic disbelief. You're kicking your own brother out on the street. No, Julian, I said, picking up my portfolio and buttoning my blazer. I am running a business, just like you've been pretending to do for 10 years. I turned toward the door, stopping just as my hand touched the brass handle. I looked back at my father, who looked entirely defeated, sitting crumpled in the leather chair. Oh, and David, I said, smiling warmly. My grandmother's trust was named the Nana Educational Fund. The company that owns this building and every square inch of the floor beneath your feet right now is Nana Trust Assets LLC *. She paid for my education after all. It just took 10 years for the dividend to clear. Without waiting for another word, I opened the door, walked out into the corridor, and let the heavy oak door click shut behind me. True to form, Julian couldn't raise the money. He didn't have the credit rating to secure a commercial loan, and my parents had already maxed out their own home equity lines of credit years ago to pay off his previous startup debts. They couldn't save him. On the 31st of the month, I watched from my car across the street as a budget-moving truck pulled up to the curb. Julian, my father, and 2 tired-looking interns spent 6 hours hauling desks, boxes, and that ridiculous espresso machine out of Suite 204 in the pouring rain. 2 weeks later, I leased Suite 204 to a thriving, legitimate software engineering firm for $5,000 a month on a guaranteed 7-year term. My parents tried to send me several emotional text messages over the following weeks, calling me heartless, telling me that Julian had been forced to move his operations back into their basement, and claiming that I had destroyed any remaining chance of family reconciliation. I didn't reply to a single message. I simply forwarded the logs to my legal team to update the existing harassment file. Today, my life is filled with genuine peace, tremendous professional success, and a circle of partners and friends who value hard work, integrity, and mutual respect. I don't carry anger or bitterness in my heart anymore, because I realize that true justice isn't about destroying your enemies in a sudden burst of rage. It's about building a life so stable, so powerful, and so successful that their cruelty becomes completely irrelevant to your future. Now, I'm curious about you who are listening to my story. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have offered him a discounted lease to keep the peace, or would you have served him the exact same notice I did? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to tell me the city or country you're watching from so I can see how far our story has traveled. Thank you so much for watching until the very end.